If you know me, you know that I love Lovecraftian horror, whether that is for tabletop games, board games, in this case a PC game, or books or film. I just love the genre. So when I saw Arkham Horror Mother's Embrace pop up on Steam, I was excited, but I knew nothing about it. So I started looking into it and my excitement grew. It's an RPG, that's a plus for me. Fantasy Flight Games had to do with the writing. They were involved with the process, and I love Fantasy Flight Games. I love complex board games, and I like to joke that if the game takes longer to set up than it does to play, I will almost assuredly love it. So the fact that they were involved, that was a plus to me. I picked it up and started playing it. I did enjoy it. I'll talk about why in a moment, but I just thought I should do kind of like a review video. The short version, if you don't want to keep watching, is I recommend it because I enjoyed it, but there were some negatives, some things that I would like to, I guess, provide constructive criticism about, because the reality is I think many of them could be addressed, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's start with the good stuff. Good stuff was atmosphere was great. Time period, sounds, setting, all really well done for a Lovecraft game, in my opinion. I think that the iconic settings were present. You had Miskatonic University, Arkham Asylum, you take a trip to the bayou. You don't hit every Lovecraftian, you know, known location, but you hit enough of them, and that really helped with, again, kind of reinforcing this as a Lovecraft style game. Voice acting and dialogue I thought was fitting for the game, the time period. I didn't see anything that really took me out of immersion. As far as one potential negative, for example, when dialogue is occurring in the game, you sometimes have to hit confirm to keep the conversation going. I really wish there was a toggle somewhere where it would just autoplay. Like, having the conversation stop at times was great, because if I was playing the game and I had a kid come in, for example, and they interrupted me, I didn't miss anything really in terms of conversation, because it would stop every time somebody stopped their segment, and then I would have to hit a button to move on. But for the majority of the game, while I'm just in the moment, having to keep hitting a button to advance conversation felt a little awkward, and I would have loved it, even if it was just a toggle that you opt into, the ability to have it autoplay in those moments. But otherwise, I felt voice acting, dialogue was fine. Nothing that was like too cheesy. Again, great fear of the unknown, or just that element of mystery. So how do I want to explain this? I am the kind of person who, when I watch a horror movie, I don't like to see the monster. The less I know, I think the better off you are as a viewer or as somebody experiencing it, because the reality is your imagination is going to be far more terrifying than whatever the reality is. That's just my opinion. This is my view. So anytime that you can create an element of mystery, a feeling of unknown, where you as the viewer, or in this case the player, kind of don't necessarily know fully what's going on, I think that's better. Now, early on in the game, they nail that very well. Yes, there is, you know, this element of like some sort of conspiracy, but you don't know, you know, who or why. All of the details are still kind of foreign to you. Now, that flushes out as the game goes on, and eventually you get to the point where you can kind of figure it out. But I just liked that they at least started with this being a murder mystery, and that helped play into that kind of fear of the unknown portion of Lovecraftian horror. So I liked that from a writing standpoint. I also really liked that the person... All right, I'm trying to do the spoiler free, right? So the person who's murdered still has dialogue, and you don't necessarily know why, but she is kind of talking just like your characters do, but it's very clear your characters can't hear her. But as your characters do things, she will, you know, say things that are disapproving, or, you know, like she doesn't remember that she's dead. There's a very interesting element with that, and I just felt like that was used very well. Now, again, like all things in the game, it eventually explains itself, but I did like that as well. Now, let's talk about some of the bad stuff. Now, the majority of this is not a reflection on the game itself. I think much of this could be cleaned up with like a patch or two, because a lot of it is just technical. For example, my graphic settings didn't seem to save. every time I launched the game, I would have to change my graphics from medium to high. Now, it's possible that that was only reflected in the interface because it did seem to save my settings, but for whatever reason, every time I launched the game, they were medium and I'd have to change them to high. You can't change keybinds in the game either. I would love to be able to change keybinds because some of the controls they're just not intuitive to me as a normal PC gamer. They took a bit to adjust to. I'll give you an example. The game doesn't have a sprint, but you walk and then you can walk faster. They call it accelerate in the game by holding down spacebar. Now, I am a shift to run PC gamer, tried and true, and shift opens a menu in the game. And so I kept opening a menu every time I wanted to walk faster and I couldn't rebind the key. So I just wish that you could rebind keys. Tutorial was also a bit more confusing than the actual controls. For example, there's a point in the tutorial where it's telling you like how you can move items, and one of the ways is like through keyboard shortcuts and the other is with your mouse to like click and drag, and click and drag makes sense. It's what I used for most of the game. But in the actual tutorial moment, like that it won't let you skip, it wouldn't let me do the click and drag that worked for the entire rest of the game. Like only in the tutorial moment, it wanted to be very specific about how you did it. And then afterwards it became intuitive. So again, sort of thing I think could be cleaned up with a patch. Just let people do it the way it works throughout the entire game. Other things were a bit weird as far as character movement. So I got stuck quite a few times because in the game, when you interact with objects, there's like this little magnifying glass that pops up, and if you're close enough, you interact with the object, and if you're too far away, you click on it and your character auto walks or kind of paths to get close enough for you to interact. A couple of times I did that, my character would like walk around a desk or behind a box or past a telescope, and then I would get stuck and I couldn't get out. So I would love to have them either, as far as like the game physics go, make it so I can't go back there, or clean up the pathing so that I don't accidentally go back there. But I kept getting stuck. Now, it's not a huge deal. You could just restart from your last checkpoint, but it was annoying because it happened like 3 or 4 times during my playthrough. And I didn't think that I was doing anything too crazy. So either they need to like widen those gaps that you can get through so I could get out, or just make it so I can't get to the spots where I was stuck to begin with, because overall that's just going to increase my gameplay experience. Now, there were some glitches as I would play. For example, I saw some descriptions that were bugged. So a lot of times when you're interacting with an item, there will be multiple choices that you have to choose from, and one choice is a good option and the others are bad, and the choice that you make is dependent upon a description that pops up, and sometimes the description instead was like just the coding side of the description instead of the actual in-game text. Very easy to clean up with a patch, but just worth noting that that was a thing. And you know, it didn't ruin my experience playing the game, but this is meant to be constructive. Other than that, story-wise, actual gameplay-wise, I felt like it was, you know, good as far as what I paid for it. I paid less than 20 bucks for it because I bought it on sale on Steam, and I feel like I definitely got my money's worth. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the game. You can see where they took some what I'll call like dev shortcuts. A couple of the levels are the same as others as far as like the layout goes, but then they just changed individual elements. So I guess what I would say is like the map is the same, but just some of the specifics has changed. But again, not necessarily something that like I'm gonna knock them down for too much, because it didn't really impact me playing through very much. And I liked the role-playing aspect. I would say that I'd like to see a second version of this game, whether it's a sequel or a different story or whatever, where you expand upon the story itself. Because when you first start the game, for example, you pick your primary investigator, you meet other investigators along the way when you play the story, but I don't know, or I never really felt like my character decision up front impacted the story too much. Now, it's possible that it did, and I just didn't realize it. I've only played through it once. I have not done multiple playthroughs yet, but it just didn't feel like it mattered a ton as I played through. Similarly, I didn't feel like that choice changed my dialogue outcomes. I also don't know if any of the choices I made along the way impacted the story or the ending. So I'd like to kind of see that expanded upon a bit. And specifically the ending. Ending has a great like ending as far as like a big boss fight, everything you'd expect from a game, but it felt very short. Like, you win, there's like a short amount of, you know, additional dialogue and story, and then it just ends. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know about the aftermath. I wanted an epilogue, and I guess I just didn't get the epilogue. So I'd love to see a little bit of that as well. And maybe that's where some of those choices come in. Maybe it doesn't affect the actual linear playthrough itself, but there's multiple epilogues based on characters or choices, etc., etc. So overall, I enjoyed the game. I would recommend it. If you like Lovecraft, it's great. If you like RPGs, it's a good time. It is, I think, worth the money that I spent on it, and I'd like to see a sequel where they expand upon it. I'd like to see more done with this story and the dialogue. Like I said, I didn't think any of it was bad. I just felt like some of the choices I was making didn't necessarily matter, and so in many ways at times the game felt more tactical than role-playing. I guess it might be the best way to put it. So for example, your investigators can develop traumas as you play through if their sanity goes down, and the traumas are then negatives. And you can get rid of traumas by, when you go on a mission, you leave certain investigators back at the office, and then when you come back, they have healed traumas. But I would love to see, again, big picture, if this was a much bigger game, much more development, and I understand all of that, but I'd love to see something where the outcomes of certain scenarios are altered a bit more depending on the investigators that you bring. So if you go to Miskatonic University, if you bring an investigator with you that had a teaching background, or, you know, was a professor or something, I'd like to see that make an impact, as opposed to if you bring a gravedigger, for example. Again, I've only done one playthrough. Maybe that does happen now, but I didn't see anything that jumped out at me as like being very specific to my character on my first playthrough. Now, the only other thing I guess that I would note is most of the levels, when you play through them, you either take 2 investigators and then you like meet a third, or you take 3. And if you take 2, a lot of times when you meet the third, there's like, you know, a cutscene and an introduction to who they were. Now, I don't know if it was because of choices I made on the level, but when I went to New Orleans the first time, I just ended up with an investigator when I got done. I felt like I played through and I investigated everything. I made all of the choices, whatever. But when I finished that level, I still only had 2 investigators with me. It only let me take 2. And when I got back to the office, there was a new one, and I had not met her before. So I don't know if I missed something there, full disclosure, but that was a thing. And so if that happens, I would love to also have, you know, maybe some sort of cutscene at the end of your mission before you go back to the office where you meet this person, because it was a bit jarring to just have a new person on the team and know nothing about her. Again, not a huge deal, but it was just something I noticed. But that's it. As I said, for me, it's a big recommend. I give it the old Charmer seal of approval. Cthulhu gives it the seal of approval. If you like Lovecraftian horror, you like RPGs, and you want to check something out, I had a good time with it. I'll probably play through at least one more time to see if any of the changes that I think might occur when you play a different investigator happen. As I said before, I didn't see anything that would suggest that there would be changes if I pick somebody else, but just to be safe, I'll probably play through it at least one more time. Pick up the other Steam achievements I didn't get on my first playthrough. I think I got all of them, but like 4 or 5. So yeah, anyway, made it this far. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you, And that's it.